We're all living through the AI revolution, right? It's changing, well, everything. But with all this amazing power, there are some pretty serious hidden risks. And you know where a lot of them are hiding? Behind a simple three-letter acronym, API. So let's get into it. So if we're going to talk about AI security, we first have to talk about the front door. I mean that literally. Every single time you use an AI, you're knocking on its API. That's the application programming interface. It's the gateway that lets all these different programs talk to each other. And just like your own front door, right? It's meant to let the good guys in, but it's also got to be tough enough to keep the bad guys out.
All right, so here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to kick things off with a story about a developer's very expensive mistake. Then, we'll zoom way out to look at the whole AI attack surface. From there, we'll dive into how to actually build a stronger front door, tackle the tricky question of who's on the hook when AI messes up, and wrap it all up with what this means for anyone building with AI today. Okay, first up, AI's hidden front door. You know, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a giant like ChatGPT or a small private AI model. Every single interaction is powered by an API. You can think of them as the universal translator, the glue that holds the entire AI ecosystem together. Now, to really see what's at stake here, let's get away from the theory and look at a real and, frankly, pretty painful story. This is what happens when that digital front door is left wide open. Check out this quote from a developer on Reddit. Talk about a wake-up call. This person was building something with OpenAI's API, and they woke up one morning to a crazy high bill. What happened? Well, an attacker got a hold of their API key and just went to town, making thousands and thousands of requests, all charged to our poor developer. Now, they got lucky and had a spending cap, but wow, it really shows you the immediate financial danger, doesn't it?
So you're probably wondering, how did this even happen? It's almost painfully simple. The developer made a mistake and left their API key, which is basically their digital house key, just sitting there in their website's public code. That's like the ultimate key under the doormat move, right? Of course, an attacker found it, walked right in, and started throwing a very expensive party on the developers tab. And look, this isn't just a sad story about one developer. That one leaky key, it's a symptom of a much, much bigger problem. So let's zoom out and take a look at the whole AI attack surface. Because believe me, it is growing at a terrifying speed.
Okay, get ready for this number because it is wild. We have seen a 1,025% increase in AI-related vulnerabilities in just the last year. That is not a typo. And here's the real kicker. 99% of them, 99, are directly tied to APIs. It's all happening at the front door. That's where the battle's being fought.
So when we talk about these attacks, they usually fall into two main buckets. First, you've got what's called unintended legitimate use. This is kind of sneaky. The attacker is using the API exactly how it's supposed to be used, but for something evil, like scraping tons of data. Think about the whole Cambridge Analytica thing. That was all done with perfectly legitimate API calls. The other bucket is exploiting vulnerabilities. Now, this is more like what you'd call classic hacking. You know, finding a weak spot in the lock and just kicking the door in. And these vulnerabilities open the door, pun intended, to all sorts of nasty attacks. We're talking about things like prompt injection, where you basically con the AI into breaking its own rules, or data poisoning, where you feed it bad info to mess with its brain. Then you've got your classic denial of service attacks to shut it down, and even something called model inversion, which is wild. It's where you can trick the model into spitting out the private, sensitive data it was trained on.
If you want a textbook example of data poisoning, you just have to remember Tay. Remember Microsoft's chatbot from 2016? In less than 24 hours of being online, a bunch of trolls figured out they could teach it things. They flooded it with just the worst stuff. And because Tay learned from its interactions, it started spewing all these horrible, racist things. Microsoft had to pull the plug fast. It was a huge public lesson in why your training data has to be protected.
Okay, so the risks are pretty clear, and they're pretty scary. The big question is, what do we do about it? How do we actually defend ourselves? And that brings us right back to our main idea. How do we fortify that gateway? How do we build a much, much smarter front door? Well, your first line of defense is something called an API gateway. The best way to think of it is like a bouncer or a security desk in the lobby of your application. It sits right between the wild west of the internet and your precious AI model. It's the single point of entry, and its job is to check IDs, enforce the rules, and watch every single request before it gets anywhere close to your AI.
But a simple checkpoint isn't always enough. See, AI agents can generate these huge, unpredictable spikes in traffic that can look just like an attack. So how do you tell the difference? That's where a smarter defense comes in, called adaptive rate limiting. It actually uses AI to fight AI. It can tell the difference between a friendly AI doing its job and a botnet trying to crash your system. It's constantly adjusting, using things like dynamic quotas and anomaly detection to keep you safe without shutting down the good guys.
Now, all these tech solutions are absolutely critical, but they're only one piece of the puzzle. Because when an AI system fails, and let's be honest, it will, and causes real harm, we have to ask a really thorny question. Who's responsible? Who pays?
And as you can see, this blame game gets messy fast. Is it the fault of the company that made the AI, the developer who wrote the code? What about the person or company that was using it? Or, and this is where it gets really sci-fi, could the AI itself be to blame? With AI, the old, simple answers just don't work anymore. You know, our laws are playing a frantic game of catch-up. Just think about this. The EU's main law for product liability was written back in 1985. Back then, software wasn't even legally considered a product. Obviously, that had to change, and it is changing, with major new rules like the new Product Liability Directive and the AI Act coming into play, designed specifically for this new world.
And these new laws are a really big deal. For the first time, they're officially calling software and AI products. They're also broadening the definition of harm to include things you can't see, like psychological harm or losing your data. But here's the biggest shift. In really complicated cases, the law can now assume the product was at fault. That flips the script and puts the pressure on the manufacturer to prove it wasn't their fault, not the other way around. All right, so we've looked at the risks, we've looked at the defenses, and we've looked at the changing laws. So what's the big takeaway? What's the new mandate for security in the age of AI? Honestly, it all boils down to this one simple idea. If you want to secure your AI apps, you have to start with your APIs, period. That's the front line. That's your main point of control. But here's the good news. This isn't some brand new field we have to invent from zero. Securing these powerful AI applications, it's really just an extension of the good old API security we've been doing for years. It's about taking those solid foundational principles and applying them to this amazing new tech. And so that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. As these AI systems get more and more autonomous, as they start making decisions all on their own, who's ultimately on the hook when they get it wrong? That's the question we all need to start thinking about as we build this future together.